very happy to be here and excited to listen to your knowledge. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Myron Yoder. I'm the chairman of the Professional Standards and Practices Commission for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I taught for 37 years in the Allentown School District where I did We the People. So thank you for continuing the tradition, even from Zoom and far away.
If you would introduce yourselves.
I'm Abby Scott.
My name is Symphony Fike.
And I'm Andrew Sutton. We are representing Unit 6. We are from Laurel High School in Montana, and our teacher is Mr. Deming.
All right. Well, I will read the question, give you time for your opening statement. We have selected question number 1. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Never in history of this nation have so many people been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity. What lessons can be learned from the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama? What is civic engagement, and what is its significance in American history? What responsibility, if any, do schools have to promote civic engagement?" You may begin.
Children's March was a week-long series of nonviolent demonstrations. More than 1,000 school children from all over Birmingham took part and hundreds were arrested. The march is a part of history, but it cannot remain merely history. The Children's March can teach many lessons. The first is that young people can affect change. This is no different from many kids today. The March for Our Lives and school climate strikes are proof. These movements are led by young people who see where they believe the world is going wrong and try to fix it. Dina Avery wrote a book about her father and his part in the Children's March. We asked her what lessons she thought the world could learn from the march. She said, "The children of 1963 were determined for their voices to be heard, and these children were willing to take an unprecedented stand for equal rights." We also learned about civil disobedience. Henry David Thoreau said, "Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison." The children of Birmingham were arrested for disobeying a law that forbade them from demonstrating. They knew that the unjust laws would never change if they didn't take a stand. We can also learn a lesson of respect for human beings. The march was widely known because the news showed children being attacked with fire hoses and police dogs. Freeman Hebrowski III was 12 years old when he marched and was imprisoned. He said, "If you can imagine children encaged, it was worse than prison. It was like being treated like little animals. It was awful, crowded. Unfortunately, we don't have to imagine. We have seen children in cages and separated from their parents in our country today. The lessons that the country should have learned from the march about equality and the importance of coming together need to be revisited today."
We believe that civic engagement can be defined as participating in your community to make a change for the common good. This can be through voting, serving on a jury, participating in community events, and exercising your rights. Throughout history, you can see Americans fighting for what they believe is a right through protest, wars, and other actions to make a change for themselves. According to Cicero, public life and public service required making personal sacrifices for the common good. You can see sacrifices like this throughout American history. It first started when Americans came together to fight for their freedom and the common good in the American Revolutionary War. Then in the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, women's suffrage, gay rights movement, and many different social groups standing for what's right by utilizing their rights and participating in their communities to improve the common good.
We believe that it is a school's responsibility to promote civic engagement, but not force it. This would take the voluntary out of voluntary associations. Due to this, we disagree with the ruling in Steerer versus Bethlehem School District. From the 20th annual Gallup poll, 86% of respondents said that preparing students to be responsible citizens was very important. Schools can fulfill their responsibility to promote civic engagement through both formal and informal civic education. Formal instruction includes classes about civics and government, while the informal curriculum includes the co-curricular activities that a school provides, such as We the People. Congress echoed a premise about civic education understood by our founders in classical republicanism when it passed Goals 2000, where 2 of the 8 national goals dealt specifically with civic education. Civic education is essential to sustain a federal republic. Alexis de Tocqueville pointed out, "Each new generation is a new people that must acquire the knowledge and develop the dispositions of private and public character that make up a federal republic." Citizens should be educated in self-governance and actively involved, not just passively accepting the direction that others give. Aristotle thought the ideals of democracy are most completely realized when every member of the political community shares in its governance. In Robert Dahl's idea of engagement, he thought that we had a choice. We could either rule ourselves or give up and let the elites rule us. But ultimately, there is no way to rule ourselves without engagement. We are now ready for your questions.
Thank you. So One of the questions I have, and you mentioned in your opening statement about the common good, as we kind of see today with differing views on governments from Georgia to Texas to Wisconsin, California, Indiana, wherever, different views on the common good. Do you think that there's one common good, or do you think that there are 50 common goods, or more than that? Can you speak to that?
So I think that the common good is different for each person because everyone interprets what that is differently. And I think that it especially can be different among generations. So for young people, the common good might be one thing, and for older people, it might be another thing. And I think that it's up to each person to determine what the common good is for them and then work towards that.
So
I also know that everyone works towards the common good, and all of these different protests are happening with the common good. For example, the coronavirus, about 30 different states have been participating in these protests because they believe that the common good is for us not to have these stay-at-home quarantines. And they also, well, the majority of Americans, they took a poll, and about 81% of Americans said that they disagreed with these protests. And so I think that there are multiple different common goods as well.
all right. So I'm curious, what issue and activity, if anything, are you willing to be hit by high power water cannons, face vicious snarling dogs, and being taken to jail? What issue and activity would you face those for?
So for me, I think that the children of the Birmingham Children's March were incredibly brave to face something like that. And I know that it would be difficult for me to put myself in that position, but if I had to choose anything, I think it would be the situation at the border right now with, like I mentioned in my prepared remarks, the children who are being separated from their parents. And we understand that there is the Flores settlement that governs the treatment of minors in custody at the border, but I still think that separating the children from their parents at all is much too harsh, especially for young children. And so I think that if I was going to take a stand for anything, it would be that.
I think I have the same disposition as the people or the children in Hong Kong right now. There are tens of thousands of youth who are participating in these demonstrations for their freedom of democracy, and over 900 of them have been imprisoned. And what they say is that they are willing to even die for democracy and freedom and helping their future generations get that.
I would take a stand for the LGBTQ community. Transgender people are actually half of the community that they face abuse, whether sexually or just in general abuse against them. So I would be willing to stand up against abuse in the LGBT community, and I would take a water cannon to the face anytime for that.
At what point would you then make the decision, or is it a valid decision to take your civil discourse if your demands are not met to resort to violence? Do you think violence is ever justified to accomplish the ends of your civic engagement?
I do not think violence is ever justified with making means for civic engagement. I know during the time of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X was kind of that person that was shown as willing to do anything for violence to get what he believed. But later in his life, when he took a pilgrimage to Mecca, he had a realization that he was wrong and that white people were just as equal as Black people and that violence should not be used towards that.
I would agree with what Symphony said, and I would also say that I think I would never resort to violence because we can see that things do get accomplished even through nonviolent methods, like with Gandhi and the independence movement from India, from Great Britain. He was able to lead a huge number of people in strictly nonviolent protests, and they did become independent.
And not only that, but in the United States, we are protected to protest under the First Amendment, freedom of expression. So by peacefully protesting, it allows for us to legally stand up for what we believe is right. And by adding violence to it and getting involved with that, it would create a legal barrier that would allow for cops to arrest people.
So if this were 1776, you would reject the Declaration of Independence?
I think 1776 is a different issue entirely. I think that Jefferson had a quote that said, "While ills are sufferable, we'll suffer them." And so while for the people of that time, they could see no other option. Like they couldn't nonviolent protest their way out of this one. Their only choice was to start a revolutionary war. And that's because for them, the ills were no longer sufferable.
And another quote by Alexis de Tocqueville states that civilized nations don't revolt unless the people feel like they have nothing less to lose. So at that point, once you feel like you have nothing left to lose, that's whenever people start to really take more violent actions. And that's like the Declaration of Independence. Whenever we declared our independence, that didn't directly mean that violence was going to ensue, but it was most likely going to happen.
We can also see that there are some consequences of sometimes not practicing civil disobedience, such as with the Nuremberg trials after World War II, where they were charged with not going against their laws because of the amount of destruction that happened in Germany.
Well, with the few seconds we have left, I'd like to ask about the parents. Do you think, I mean, the parents of the children that were participated in the Birmingham March, do you think that they were contributing to the cause, or do you think that they were exploiting their kids?
So I think that the parents were just as sympathetic towards the cause, but I think in their case, they possibly had more to lose, like with their jobs. And I had been reading many firsthand accounts of the Children's March, and a lot, should
Please.
I keep going?
Yes, please.
A lot of the parents were encouraging their children to go out there and protest because they could not themselves for fear of putting their family at risk.
All right.
Nice.
Nicely done. We'll give you a few comments and some feedback. Excellent presentation. I thought it was particularly organic in terms of you all work together very well as a team and kind of seamlessly go through there. And I've said this before on some of the other units, the idea or the notion of being able to raise your hand and signal to your other teammates that you have something to say, I think is particularly useful. So this format kind of helps with that. If I had one suggestion of criticism, I would say in your paper to slow down a little bit in delivery. Doesn't affect content, doesn't affect the scoring, but just make sure that you're slowing down and giving a thoughtful presentation that way. I particularly appreciated your interjection of quotes and de Tocqueville into today. So the idea of applying those concepts to today and applying those theories and kind of incorporating them into what we're seeing today is particularly useful. So thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, I also very much enjoyed your presentation, and I'm also going to comment on the fact that you use a lot of very applicable quotes. I've seen presentations where there are lots of quotes, but the quotes weren't necessarily really pertinent to the question. You were able to find quotes that were very pertinent and applicable to the question itself. So I thought that was very well done. Also thought your answers to the cross-examination questions were very well done and equally based on your personal feelings. And I've always told students that we expect a very good 4-minute presentation, but it's in the cross-examination where we can really determine whether or not they've done some thought, done some preparation, analyze all the issues that could arise from the question. You did a very good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I too want to mirror that. I thought you did a wonderful job. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I mean, you handled it well with a lot of quotes and made them very germane to the issue at hand. I wish I had more time. You mentioned the Bethlehem case, which actually is right next door to Allentown, not 5 minutes away from where I live. And
Wow.
I found it interesting you were to use that because while it is civic engagement, the focus of it is volunteerism. I'm not sure it really drove students more in the civic realm in terms of engaging in politics, engaging in protests or things like that. So it's an interesting experiment over there that's still going on. And many students view it as just another project. And that's pretty much it. That's sad. But interesting that you went there as a case. You handled the questions very well. Any parents listening behind the doors or any on the other side of the computer, I got to applaud your students. They did a very good job. Thank you for supporting your students.